Hi everybody, let me know when of course you can see and indeed hear me on this very nice sunny afternoon. Hello Leslie, lovely to have you. Elizabeth, Cottingley Fairies. Oh well, yes, great story, wish it was true. A good film about that, did you see? I think done maybe the last sort of 5 years, but a really good film, but really kept the spirit and the magic of it, but obviously, talked about, what had gone on. But yeah, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to everything to be real. But maybe it is. Maybe it is. Hello, Tish. Thank you for sending me a coffee. It's very kind of you. Elizabeth, as ever, thank you for your support. And Ronnie. And, oh, that's fantastic, Fran. Thank you. I'm glad to be coming through loud and clear all that way. We take it for granted because we've been doing it for so long. But isn't it remarkable that I'm sat here by the river in York and, I'm talking in almost real time. You're seeing me and hearing me in high quality, and you're, what, 5,000 miles away? Something nuts, that we just kind of take for granted now, but you stop and think about it, and it's just, it's just as magical as the belief in fairies, really, isn't it? It's just as unlikely in many respects. We just sort of take for granted now that these things can happen, but at one time would have been witchcraft or magic or fantastical or just unbelievable. Mrs. John is well, she's with her mum today. Her mum's not so well, getting on a bit, needs quite a bit of care, so she's with her mum today. I've got the fun job. Relative on the Antiques Roadshow, Susan, fantastic. I agree, technology can be utterly wonderful and amazing, and it's just to think that we've just got used to it, that we take it for granted. And in one respect, that's great. I mean, it's something not to be scared of, and at one time, I hope none of us mind me saying, we're all getting on a bit, myself included. But that we can be digital natives as well. It's not just for kids anymore. It really is within the hands of anybody that wants to access this technology. It's really liberating, but of course with it comes a price, and we see that through how horrible some social media can be and all this kind of stuff. But getting back to the purity of this sense of coming together, the digital hearth as I call it, I think it's magical. Coming and being with people, being with friends, people who know you, even if you've never actually met them in real life, and spending an hour together, listening to some stories, chatting away, doing your thing while I do my thing. That's magic, it's rare, I think, in this world where everything is about pushing us further away. I think things that bring us together should be valued. So taking an hour on a Saturday to do that, I think, is time well spent by anybody. So Robin, hello from New York, Brooklyn, is joining us. Sandy's with us. Hello, Sandy. And Leslie, always is like to have our friend Leslie on. How's the weather where you are in North London, Leslie? It's been not quite cracking the paving stones up here, but certainly very agreeable. Kind of say mid to high 20s, I would say, but nothing uncomfortable. As you can see, there's no sweat on my brow. It's very nice. Been a blessing, Elizabeth, of technology. A rare group of wonderful people, and when you find a rare group of wonderful people, you want to, hold them closer, do you not? So we're a couple of minutes to go before we go live. Although, of course, I am live right now, but the official bit, the scripted bit, the bit that I've come to actually tell you about, rather than witching. So I thought when we did Susan adds to my well-being as well. You're not alone in that. It's not simply about being on the receiving end, knowing that you can. Write and research stories and in telling them you help people with their quality of life. That helps mine as well. So it's a two-way street. But when we did the Fear and Control Fear in York about 3-4 weeks ago, we started at this bridge. We're going to start in a minute, and we went into town. So I thought today we'd go the other way. We'll walk down the river. So nice, peaceful, leafy, green. We'll walk down to the Millennium Bridge, the footbridge. Cross over, maybe go for a walk in Roundtrees Park. Keep it nice and peaceful so we can focus in on the kind of stories, the imagery of Midsummer and of solstice. So hopefully that'll work nicely today. So what's Leslie been saying? Hello Linda, lovely to have you on. More New Yorkers. What a joy. Hope we're cool. I'll go to Cotswold in July. Well, it'll be cool, maybe, I don't know, but busy, unfortunately. It's so wonderful as the Cotswolds that now... Although, did anybody see a story this week, by the way, suggesting, it mustn't tell Ian, he'll get ever so upset, but that Shakespeare might actually be from London, and the guy from Stratford was apparently a corn merchant. Now, this is somebody's theory, it may be disproven, but suggesting that the good people of Stratford on Avon basically latched onto him, but there's no actual link between that Shakespeare and playwriting, whereas this London-based Shakespeare is an actor guy, he hires theatres, he hires actors and all this, that and the other. So wouldn't that be odd if that came to be proven? I'm not saying for a second it is, but that after all this time we have to dissociate Stratford from Shakespeare. That wouldn't be good for the British sort of Stratford and Shakespeare industry at all. So I suspect they'll do their very, very best to poo-poo that story. But there you go, just as it pops up on the weekly news cycle. But Cotswold's beautiful, but with or without Shakespeare, it would still smell as sweet. See what I did there, Linda? Linda knows what I'm talking about. Right, I guess it's time that I put away these childish things and got on with today's tour. So welcome, one and all. You're joining me here in York. I didn't feel the need to go anywhere particular today. I thought I wanted the story to kind of speak for itself, so I kind of wanted a kind of nice, calm, bucolic background where we can kind of just be in nature and talk about custom traditions, history, meaning, deeper meanings, contemporary elements of solstice and midsummer. So there we go. Right, without further ado then, I'm going to put my glasses on, over my glasses. That's what I like about these glasses, they just sit over there, so I can still see what's going on, but read the screen as well. So here we are, let's just start by the river. We'll go for a nice river walk. So from the very earliest civilizations, people have marked time by watching the sky. The way the sun rises, the way it sets, and how those points drift slowly across the horizon throughout the year. And people notice something remarkable. At this point in June, the sun seems to pause. And for a few days, it rises in almost exactly the same place. It looks as if it stopped its journey. And that's where we get the word solstice, from the Latin solstitium, meaning literally the sun stands still. This year, the summer solstice falls tomorrow morning, Sunday the 21st of June at precisely 9:24 British summertime. That single instant, not the whole day, is the solstice. Now if you're aware of that, a lot of people think the solstice is a full day. It's not, hi Marlena, it's a precise moment in time. And it is the moment that the sun reaches the highest point in our northern sky. Before afterwards, beginning its slow, almost imperceptible descent towards winter again. How cheery is that? So from tomorrow, winter is on its way. And this precise timing is given to us by the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, London, so not too far away from Lesley, which calculates the exact astronomical moment each year. So we might talk about solstice day, but scientifically it's a flicker, it's a moment in time, and it's a single turning point in the Earth's orbit. In pagan belief, this was the moment when the Oak King, or the Green Man, was handed the year. He handed the year over to the Holly King, who would rule the waning half of the year up until Yule. So it's a handoff point. And even at the height of light and life, there's an awareness that the long decline had quietly begun. Now the solstice can fall on the 20th, the 21st, or even occasionally on the 22nd. And that's simply because the Earth takes about 365 and a quarter days to orbit the sun. You remember the leap year every 4 years to make it work? So consequently, that periodically throws out the solstice. So normally we talk about it being June the 21st, and it generally is. But for the reasons of this not precise orbit, it can be the 20th or the 21st. But it's tomorrow morning this year. So that extra quarter day nudges the moment forward roughly 6 hours each year. So consequently, every fourth year, it moves it one. until leap year pulls the calendar back into line. So you can kind of see how the leap year is a kind of mathematical adjustment that kind of applies to the solstice as well. Fascinating stuff, I'm sure you'd agree. And so if you've been itching to know without ever thinking, I wonder what the solstice is, now you know. So the solstice gives us the longest day, but it's rarely the hottest. So here in Britain, the warmest weeks usually arrive in July or early August. And there's a reason for this. The land and the surrounding seas take time to absorb all that extra sunlight, and the sun is strongest in late June. But the heat keeps on building for weeks afterwards, and meteorologists call this the seasonal thermal lag. Okay. And so the same reason that the hottest part of the day is mid-afternoon rather than noon, because the heat has built up. So kind of stretch that across the whole season, and that's why you get the hottest weather, is at the kind of back end. And the further north you go, the longer the longest day becomes. In London tomorrow, the sun will rise at 4:43 a.m, giving just over 16.5 hours of daylight. But get this, if you went up to Shetland, okay, so to the far north, the islands of Scotland, the sun rises more than an hour earlier and sets more than an hour later. So you're getting nearly 19 hours of daylight up there, which of course is a very long day indeed. So that's the kind of solstice in scientific terms. Not we're going to get that out of the way. It's the exact moment where the sun appears to pause before turning back towards winter. But long before anyone understood astronomy, they watched the light change. They saw the sunrise hold its place in the horizon, and they knew that this moment mattered. For thousands of years, people have gathered at this moment of the year to honour the sun, the land, the season, and the strange magic of so much light. It's all very overgrown down here. I'm going to have to keep away from the nettles on my bare legs. So solstice celebrations go all the way back to the Neolithic era. So there's at least 5,000 years of human beings marking this turning point. In northern and central Europe, early farming communities tied the solstice to the rhythm of the crops. Oh, back to the river a bit. So Celtic, Slavic and Germanic peoples lit great bonfires to strengthen the sun for the rest of the growing season and to bless the harvest that was still to come. Now, the clearest Neolithic legacy of the solstice is written in stone. Many stone circles and barrows appear to have been built around the movement of the sun. Now, we don't have written accounts from the time, so we can't be definitive, but the evidence is compelling. Stones positioned with care to frame the sunrise or sunset on the summer and winter solstices. Some were even shaped with hammerstones, so that from the centre of the circle, the sun would rise perfectly in a carved notch. So Stonehenge, of course, is the most famous of these sites, and work began there around 5,000 years ago. And its alignment with the midsummer sunrise, the sun rising over the heel stone, shows a precise understanding of the solar cycle. Waving like. It's very likely that those gathered there were worshipping a sun deity, and they were far from alone. The deification, in other words, treating something as a god, of the sun, is one of the great shared threads of human culture. In ancient Egypt, the sun god Ra was a supreme deity, the source of life and creation. Horus embodied the rising sun, and Ra's daily journey across the sky became the story of life, death, and rebirth. River is fairly high, Leslie. Yeah, not astonishingly high, but fairly high. Yeah. And the Egyptians didn't just tell that story; they built it in stone. So at the great temple of Karnak, the entire axis of the complex was aligned so that at sunset on the summer solstice, the setting sun be framed by the western gate, and at sunrise in the winter solstice. I've got an image of the Temple of Karnak. So there's the western gate. So at the coming down of the sun in summer, and going up of the sun at winter solstice, you've got a sunrise that's been engineered to honour a god. Isn't it beautiful? You know, and this is, you know, Stonehenge is even older than this, but it's the precision of the geometry, isn't it, that it makes us, you know, any time you get lazy and think that somehow people from years gone by, you know, were somehow backwards or just kind of, you know, weren't up to what we are, look at these things that they made with their bare hands, without any forms of power, and then try and feel superior afterwards, you know? So the Greeks worshipped Helios. So in Egyptian, you've got Ra, the sun god. In Greece, it's Helios, who drove his golden chariot across the heavens each day. And later Apollo took on solar qualities: light, prophecy, healing. The Romans followed with the god Sol, also shown as a 4-horse chariot crowned with rays of light. And temples to Sol stood across the empire, including one at the Circus Maximus, where crowds prayed for good harvests and protection from darkness. And as for Stonehenge itself, well, we don't exactly know what the rituals took place there, but we can take clues from the ancient Celtic Druids, who were described by Roman writers. Now, the Druids never wrote their own traditions down, so everything we know comes from outsiders. But the writers that we have, Pliny, Tacitus and Julius Caesar, so, you know, we've got a pretty good form. So let's get an image up of solstice at Stonehenge last year, at dawn. So they describe, these Roman writers, the Druids as priests, judges, teachers, astronomers, a learned class deeply connected to nature, especially oak groves. They held ceremonies in sacred spaces, including stone circles. The solstices and equinoxes were central moments in their calendar, times when the movements of the heaven guided ritual and belief. Caesar even tells us that both male and female Druids presided over worship, settled religious disputes, and carried out sacrifices, both human and animal. And given their focus on the astronomy, even the harvest of mistletoe depended on the position of the moon. So it's no surprise that summer and winter solstices, along with the spring and autumn equinoxes, were the principal dates for Druidic ceremonies. And Stonehenge, with its alignments and avenues, would have been one of the most important ritual landscapes. Let's get rid of that for you. Hope you're enjoying this, finding it interesting. Oh, I could now see the screen a little bit more, but it's a bit dark. Oh, right. However, Stonehenge is just one, so we'll go over the Blue Bridge, then we'll walk down by it. By the river. Hopefully the picture's coming through nice and clear. So, has anybody been to Stonehenge? Do let me know if any of you actually visited Stonehenge, or any other stone circles we're about to talk about. Now, and Barrows, which you might not have come across. This is the Blue Bridge, so this is where, nothing to do with solstice, but just over here to explain. We've got the confluence of the River Ouse on that side, and the Foss on this side, becoming one river. So there you go, Blue Bridge covers that. And they're called Blue Bridge for obvious reasons, because it's painted blue, and there's the flood barrier. So yeah, Stonehenge is sort of far from the only monument that was built to kind of mark these great turning points of the year. Just a few miles away lives Avebury, which is the largest stone circle in Britain. So I'll just bring up a picture of Avebury. And again, all these pictures are pictures at solstice, at dawn. So this is where the sun is kind of coming up. And as you can see here with the heel stone, it's this alignment again. So Avebury is a vast ring of 100 stones, some weighing around kind of 40 tons, arranged in 3 concentric circles. So 5,000 years old, it may have been used to track the movements of the sun and the moon. Take that one down, bring another one up. So nearby in Marlborough stands Devil's Den. This is the remains of a Neolithic burial chamber. What an image that is, huh? So you've got 2 men supports supporting a kind of single capstone. So the one going across the top is a colour capstone. And at midsummer sunset and midwinter sunrise, the sun appears perfectly framed between them. This idea of capturing light within stone carried also into the burrows, which are burial chambers built to harness the power of the sun. So at West Kennet Longbarrow, so let's bring up West Kennet Longbarrow for you. It's getting jolly exciting now. Oh, hang on, let's get rid of you first. Ooh, I messed up again. Okay. Right, this is really interesting. Okay, so the rising sun shines deep into a passage at certain times of the year. It's a deliberate alignment that brings light, warmth, and life back to the dead once a year. So it's like kind of, a Stone Age kind of Day of the Dead kind of thing. It's a wholly remarkable kind of shining, and there was about 50 or 60 people buried in this kind of tomb. But it was engineered precisely to shine light on there in solstice. I mean, how powerful! You cannot get any stronger sense, can you, of the importance of this if they are honouring their dead by building tombs. Yeah, the three pyramids, I haven't got a picture of it, but the three pyramids, Great Pyramids of Giza with the Sphinx there, it's exactly the same. It's all aligned, on the solstice. This is ancient knowledge that we've just had communally as the human family for thousands of years. We know this stuff. Sutton Hoo's fab as well, wonderful burial ground of a Saxon ship there down in Suffolk, isn't it, Leslie? Wonderful place to visit. There's another one at a place called Stony Littleton. So here, this one, to be fair, this is winter solstice rather than summer solstice, but exactly the same idea. So at a precise moment, this tomb is flooded with light, and that's at Stony Littleton. So it's a kind of reminder that even in the darkest season, the kind of light returns. And this kind of power of this healing light, of beneficial light, this kind of light that is imbued with such a deep, sacred kind of importance to early peoples, because of course it was tied to warmth and to farming and to agriculture and the harvest, and all these things that we've talked about in different kind of ways. But you can understand kind of venerating the light, same with water and rain. It makes absolute sense. If you are farming and reliant upon the land to live, of course you're going to, worship the things that make your life possible. So it's not a sort of surprise. It's just a kind of delightful confirmation that none of this stuff is kind of trivial or abstract, or isn't it cute they believe this stuff? Isn't it wonderful that they recognise the levers? All right, maybe they thought they had perhaps more control over the planet by kind of praying to it, by respecting it. But is it really that much different to us now saying, let's look after the planet, let's be more sustainable, let's work with the planet rather than fighting against it? It's the same instinct that we know deep down that, the world, the earth will give to us if we kind of respect it and treat it well. So it kind of shows how important it was, these early civilizations. And tomorrow morning across Britain, people will still gather in these stone circles to watch the sunrise, just as our ancestors did. And one of those incredible places to go, and I'd be amazed if any of you have been to this, but it's a wonderful place to be, is Callanish. And that's out in the Outer Hebrides. It's also a wonderful place to see the Northern Lights. I've never seen the Northern Lights, but Callanish is one of the places where they are spectacular. So let me find you a picture of Callanish. So again, we're looking at sunrise on solstice. And because it's so far north, the hours of daylight are almost endless. They have a long twilight that's known locally as the Simmerdim, when the sky never goes fully dark. And so culturally, this outer part of Scotland, upper part of Scotland, the islands, of course places where the Vikings settled, have strong cultural similarities and links to Viking culture, to Nordic culture. And of course, it's there where you kind of get this land of the midnight sun, isn't it? Because they're so far north that they get these literally 24 hours of daylight, where the summer solstice is so profound, but equally the other one where you get almost no daylight all day. So it's obviously at the extremes, you can imagine, where it has the biggest impact on humanity. So you go to Callanish, and it's kind of celebrated as if it was in Scandinavia. So across the country, people headed into the countryside for flower crowns, maypole dancing, songs and outdoor meals and long bright evenings. Folk costumes, decorated maypoles, music. It's a celebration of summer, beauty, and the magic of Northern Light. But Midsummer, so this is the festival kind of named Midsummer, isn't held at the solstice itself, but between Friday the 19th and 25th of June, so yesterday basically. So, but its roots are older. So you actually the film, there's the kind of cult horror film called Midsummer that kind of deals with this, a bit Wickermanish, if you're familiar with Wicker Man. That sort of point, you know, where kind of customs stop being kind of endearing and start being frightening and strange and scary. But the roots of kind of Midsummer are kind of agrarian. They're tied to fertility, growth, and the kind of height of the season. So people gather flowers, they weave floral crowns and dance around the maypole. They sing and play games and eat classic midsummer foods, which in Scandinavia are pickled herring, new potatoes, strawberries, and schnapps. And there are old folk traditions too. Love charms and divination. The custom of placing flowers under your pillow to dream of your future spouse is one of them. Take a drink. Finland, which of course is even further north, has got its own version, Johannes, which is a celebration of nature, water and fire, and the almost endless light of northern summer. So historically it was filled with fertility rites and love spells, and it still carries that sense of midsummer magic. It looks like lakeside cottages, saunas, bonfires and grilled food to the kind of modern eye, under kind of late night swims and a sky that never goes kind of fully dark. But it's tying many of the themes together that we're going to explore that have kind of been around for centuries, including water, which we'll come to in a minute. Further south in Tyrol in Austria, the solstice is marked with a fire on a kind of spectacular scale. Again, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but around the 21st of June, thousands of small fires are arranged across the Miminger Mountains. And a bit like how they do these kind of fantastic drone shows now in the sky, they do it with candles on hillsides, so they create these wonderful designs. I haven't got a picture, unfortunately. But they don't kind of announce what they're going to be until, you know, they light them, and then suddenly the hillside lights up and you see this, you know, wonderful depiction. So it's really kind of magical. So great sort of shapes and symbols, and they light them all at once. So then the whole mountain kind of glows with ancient imagery. Really kind of cool. And these fire festivals often blur the line between midsummer and the solstice. And that confusion is understandable, because in everyday British language, the two terms are used interchangeably, but they're not the same. Midsummer's Day is the traditional calendar, is the 24th of June. So obviously today's the 20th, 21st tomorrow is the solstice itself. But Midsummer's Day isn't until the 24th, so it's not the same thing, solstice and midsummer, but they are linked. So it falls 3 days generally after the solstice. And if we're being scientific, really, you'd say midsummer should really fall in late July or August, when the heat actually peaks. And obviously, if we think about meteorological summer starts on the 1st of June, doesn't it? Yeah, astronomical summer starts on the 21st of June. So how is midsummer 3 days later? It just doesn't make any sense, does it? But there's a reason for that. And the deeper reason lies in the older Celtic calendar, where summer began at Beltan on the 1st of May. Do you remember we did a May Day tour? We might talk about Beltan a little bit. So Beltan was celebrated with bonfires, maypoles, flower crowns and feasts, and rituals of fertility and growth, what we now recognise as May Day. So if the summer begins in early May, then the solstice genuinely is in the middle of the summer, not at the start. So that's why it's called midsummer, from our ancient Celtic calendar, where summer starts at May Day. That's the kind of older way of reckoning the seasons. And it's also why Shakespeare set A Midsummer Night's Dream around the solstice, and why so many midsummer festivals and midsummer place names cluster in late June. Glastonbury, to example. It's not on this year, but the classic Glastonbury Fair is a midsummer festival. So Midsummer's Day itself, though, has an entirely different heritage. It isn't tied to astronomy at all. It's tied to the feast of St. John the Baptist. And kind of like so many Christian festivals, it sits on top of an older layer of celebration. By late June, crops will be growing well and the year looked promising. So communities marked the moment with festivals of light, fire and thanksgiving. At some point the church fixed June the 24th as the birthday of St. John the Baptist, the forerunner of Christ, whose birth will be marked 6 months later, in the darker days, of course, of the year. So bonfires, bathing in water and watching the sunrise all became part of the celebration. And the result was that the feast carried both religious meaning but also the older seasonal joy of Midsummer. So not at all dissimilar to Christmas, insofar as it's kind of got its pagan Yule elements, its midwinter festival, but it's also the Christian feast of the celebration of the birth of Christ. So very, very kind of similar in that respect, that it's kind of two things that sit harmoniously together, but are quite different, but we just are quite happy for them to be different and sit alongside each other. We don't seek for them to be kind of separate out. It's just part of the identity. But in creating the Feast of St. John, the church also created St. John's Eve. And this is a night that quickly became inseparable from magic, from mystery, and from witchcraft. Now, many Christian feast days gathered folk beliefs around them. Some playful, some taken surprisingly seriously. Got the bridge in front of us now. Christmas Eve had tales of talking animals. Easter had egg balancing charms. And the eves of other feasts, May Eve, Lammas Eve, Candlemas Eve, St. Mark's Eve, all developed their own peculiar reputations. But none of them compare to Midsummer Night, which is St. John's Eve. For one thing, the timing meant people were outdoors. At Christmas, any eccentric customs stayed around the hearth. In Midsummer, they moved out into the open, into fields, hillsides and village greens. As soon as the last rays of the sun had faded, bonfires were lit across towns and villages, and even in the smallest hamlets, it became a communal holiday. A welcome pause between the revelry of May Day and the hard work to come from the harvest. Let's take a drink. Oh. Good. So the church kind of interestingly embraced these St. John's fires as a kind of deep expression of faith, kind of solemn expression of faith. Entirely sure that was always the case, but they decided to view them in that kind of framework for that. So lighting the bonfire was honour reserved for civic dignitaries, and kings themselves were going to take part. In France, Louis XIV lit the Midsummer bonfire in Paris in 1648, as his predecessors had done before. I think I'm going to go up here. Let's get out of the way of that landing stage down there. In other places in Catholic Brittany, the clergy blessed the wood piles and cast on the first brand. Then explore Yorkshire. Yeah. Explore Yorkshire. Then crowds carrying flaming torches would walk out into the fields, through ripening crops, or along the cliffs by the sea, shouting and singing as neighbouring villagers answered with their own fires. So some regions rolled a burning wheel down a hill, a red-hot circle representing the sun at the height of its power. The Vikings actually started that, the sun wheel, this idea of kind of a circular burning symbol. So again, it's this sense of Northern European culture kind of working its way in, but then becoming accepted by the church as a perfectly kind of valid and orthodox way. So there's one thing you have to say about the medieval church. It was certainly very, very kind of relaxed and okay with bringing in what had been pagan ideas and giving them the veneer, at least, of kind of orthodox kind of Christianity. So with the burning wheel at the top, it's at the top of its power, isn't it? By the time it's coming down the hill, you're representing the sense, aren't you, that the sun will go down and that we're kind of rolling back down in descent towards winter. And it echoed the words attributed to St. John the Baptist. He must increase and I must decrease. He, of course, being Jesus, who was going to follow him. So old bones And rubbish were burned too, symbolising the end of the old law and the beginning of the new. And because St John the Baptist is the saint of water, Midsummer also gathered a whole set of water customs. So bathing in rivers, lakes or the sea. So it isn't a coincidence that we're walking down by the water. It is a pretty place to walk down here, Elizabeth, yeah. It's lovely. We're going to go over the Millennium Bridge and walk up through the gardens, through the park. I see so many people around, lovely. Yeah, so bathing was believed to bring strength, beauty or protection. The dew gathered on St John's Eve, so the morning dew, was believed to have a healing power. And in some places people even playfully sprinkled water on the neighbours. But bonfires and bathing weren't the only custom tied St John's Eve. Another almost universal tradition was the gathering of herbs and plants on this night. Which herbs depend on the region, depending on where you were, but they always tend to include St John's wort. Have you heard of that one? So wort spelled W-R-O-R-T. And very often one called yarrow, probably less well known, but it may have different names. You come across a yarrow? Others might be fennel, rue, rosemary, lemon verbena, mallows, laburnum, foxgloves, elderflowers, goatsbeard, bracken or masterwort. Some are placed in water overnight and the water used for washing the face in the morning. Others were blessed by a priest and hung over doors and windows to keep out witchcraft and evil spirits. But the most sought of all was the mythical fern seed, which if gathered just before midnight was said to grant invisibility. Now, given that ferns reproduce by spores, not seeds, this was a very challenging quest. And as you probably noticed, this has very little to do with organised religion. This is purely in the realm of magic. St John's Eve was also a night when witches and the fairy folk were thought to be especially active, where they might find themselves whisked away on a fairy horse if they stepped on the wrong plant. Shakespeare set A Midsummer Night's Dream on this night for exactly that reason. 16th century audiences knew these beliefs intimately. They were as widespread as the bonfires themselves. And around those fires, people imagined not just neighbours gathering, but fairies too, rooted in both pagan custom and Christian feast day. Midsummer in Tudor England was more than a seasonal celebration. It was a sacred hinge of the year, a time to honour the turning of the seasons, protect against illness and misfortune, and indulge in a little mischief. So from fire-breathing dragons to enchanted plants gathered at midnight, Tudor Midsummer gives us a vivid window into the imagination of the age. Midsummer, the summer solstice, came at a natural pause. Crops were planted and the days were long. And the people had a moment to breathe before the frenzy of the harvest. It was a time to feast, to gather, and to set things on the fire for good luck. And as we'll see, to mix a bit of pagan wildness with Christian ceremony. Before Christianity arrived with its saints and feast days, Midsummer was already spiritually charged across pagan Europe. Stonehenge itself shows that people were marking the sun's peak power thousands of years ago. This was the height of the sun's strength, a time of growth, abundance, fertility. And so naturally people lit fires. They danced, they feasted, they did everything they could to encourage the sun to linger. So I'm trying to make it run over here. The early church, ever the kind of savvy marketer, didn't ban these celebrations. It rebranded them. And by the end of the Tudor period, Midsummer had become a glorious hybrid. Officially religious, unofficially still very much about fire, flowers and fun. And before Midsummer even arrived, the season had already begun with Corpus Christi, held on Thursday after the 8th Sunday after Easter, which you'd have to work out today is very close. which is about as Tudor as kind of dating gets. So Corpus Christi, which means the body of Christ, of course, had papal approval from 1317, and it was meant to honour the Eucharist. In practice, it was a pagan pageant's kind of lover's dream. Towns competed for the most extravagant processions: floats, clergy, banners, music and biblical plays. In York, the consecrated host was carried in a silver and crystal vessel under a canopy. In Coventry, velvet banners were embroidered with gold thread. And the London Skinner Company marched with more than 200 clergy. The York Mystery Cycle included 52 scenes and would have taken 21 hours to perform. They're doing it again, by the way, this summer. So assuming the audience had the stamina and the sandwiches to kind of keep up with 21 hours of drama. But the Reformation killed all that. Far too Catholic to get rid of that. So Protestant reformers cracked down on what they saw as papist excesses, and Midsummer fell within that. And so by the 1570s, Corpus Christi processions were gone. They were big party poopers, the reformers. Midsummer, though, survived a little longer, which brings us to one of those iconic features of the Tudor Midsummer, which is the bonfire. So nothing says happy solstice like setting things on fire. That's what we believe in humanity. So these bonfires were lit at sunset on St. John's Eve, and they burned late into the night. And they weren't just decorative. People believed that these fires were medicinal. Now, the Tudors didn't know about germs, but they knew that bad smells and bad air, or miasma, accompanied disease. And summer was the plague season. So they lit fires to purify the air, hoping the smoke would drift over the fields and protect the crops. Some even positioned the bonfires to catch the breeze. And then there were the bones. Yes, literal bones. The word bonfire may well actually come from bone fire. We don't really know. And this refers to the custom of throwing old animal bones into the flames. And this was meant to ward off evil, to scare away dragons, naturally, and to bring good luck. And one 15th century monk complained that it made the whole town stink, which is entirely believable. John Stowe, the great chronicler of London, remembers the bonfires fondly. He described whole neighbourhoods gathering wood, setting tables outside with cakes and ale, and inviting friends and strangers to feast together. In his words, it was a time of great familiarity. Even enemies reconciled over sweetbread and a good drink. So it's kind of Tudor block party, if your block included bones, plague, and indeed smoke, and generally fire hazards, of course. And if you think that these kind of bonfires were intense, wait for the marching witches. These were elaborate nighttime processions in places like London, where up to 4,000 people might take part. Morris dancers, jingling hobby horses, prancing, people on stilts towering over the crowds, pageants, music, fireworks, and the occasional monster. In 1521, one midsummer parade included a giant float of Pluto, god of the underworld, complete with a servant that spat fireballs into the crowd. I know you're thinking, what could possibly go wrong? But it sounds amazing, don't you think, these parties? What's this quote here? Oh, thank you very much. That's lovely, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. So the Lord Mayor's Guild staged 5 major pageants in that year. They were called the Castle of War, the Tree of Jesse, St. John the Evangelist, St. George, and Pluto. So some of them, of course, were religious. Others, inevitably, a lot less so. But that's the vibe of Midsummer. Now, one of them involved a float featuring naked boys who'd been dyed black to represent devils. It's fair to say child protection was in its infancy in the Tudor era. Sometimes they even set dragons on fire. The Drapers Guild once paraded a dragon soaked in aqua vitae, so early form of brandy, and then lit it. So again, health and safety was not really a kind of Tudor priority. And these events weren't technically religious, but they still attracted scrutiny. The authorities worried about riots, especially in tense political times. By the mid-16th century,
Even the watch marchers were fading. Henry VIII banned them in 1539 to save money, or so he said. Somerset tried to revive them briefly, and Elizabeth I, who adored pageantry, tried again. But the city declined. They were too expensive, too dangerous, too flammable. And through all of this, one belief remained. Midsummer night was magical. The hours between dusk and dawn was powerful of the year, the moment where boundaries between worlds thinned, and witches, fairies and spirits were at their most active. Let's get a drink. It'd be awesome to have a dragon. Yes, absolutely. We should be torching dragons. Maybe not. Stand well back if you're a light dragon that's been soaked in brandy. So Midsummer Night's Dream captures this energy perfectly, with Puck, also known as Robin Goodfellow, darting around, creating mischief. Now, if you haven't watched the play, don't know the play, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to go and talk about sort of a couple of things within the play that I think are very interesting and very pertinent to the kind of midsummer setting. So Puck is one of the kind of main characters, and he's also known as Robin Goodfellow, and he kind of darts around causing mischief. So the character of Puck has deep roots in English folklore. Originally he was called Pucka, and he was a trickster, part sun god, part spirit of chaos, depending on who you asked. He could bless your crops, or he could steal your socks, or maybe both. People believe that witches harvested their magical plants at midsummer, when the sun gave the herbs their greatest power. So, just before we go in, I don't think I've ever been down here and mentioned this before, but these gates, by the way, here are magnificent. They are the gates of Roundtree's Park, and they came from, I think this is true, a French chateau of a guy that went to the guillotine, you know, in the Great Terror in France. They're certainly 18th century, they're certainly French, but I'm sure I've heard that's where they kind of came from. They were sort of sold on the cheap when they broke up these estates in France of these hated aristocrats. And they ended up over here as a gift to the people of York and Roundtree's Park. So there you go. Interesting little story. So thinking about fairies, if you kind of picture fairies as kind of glittering, harmless little creatures, kind of Tinkerbell with a wand, then you're kind of looking at Midsummer Night's Dream through a modern lens. Should we have a look at the flower beds as we kind of walk down here? We'll give you something else to look at. It looks like plenty of water. Let's look at some flowers. So to understand the real tension, danger, and kind of dramatic irony in Shakespeare's dramatic comedy, you have to see the magical characters in the way the Elizabethan audience saw them, which is entirely differently. In the 1590s, fairies were not whimsical bedtime companions. They were feared. They were invoked to explain illness, sudden death, ruined food, missing livestock, blighted crops, and the terrifying phenomenon of changelings. The belief that fairies stole human infants and left sickly substitutes behind. Fairies were not cute. They were unpredictable, powerful, and often malicious. So if we take Puck, today we think of him as a cheeky trickster, but his alternate name, Robin Goodfellow, carries centuries of folklore. He was a hobgoblin, a domestic spirit who could help with chores if treated well, or torment the household of offenders, if offended. In 1584, Reginald Scott published what was known as the Dictionary of Witchcraft, which lists the beings that terrified ordinary people. And among them he listed spirits, witches, urchins, elves, hags, fairies, and Robin Goodfellow. So when Shakespeare introduces Puck, he doesn't present him as a playful sprite. The very first fairy that meets him recognises him as a notorious troublemaker. And we have the line, "Are you not he that frightens the maidens of the villagery, skim milk and sometimes labour in the quern, and bootless make the breathless housewife churn?" This is not Disney, this is folklore. But here's Shakespeare's genius. He domesticates Robin Goodfellow. He puts a leash on the chaos by making Puck the servant of Oberon, bound to obey, eager to please. So Shakespeare takes a figure who in popular belief could be generally dangerous and places him inside a controlled dramatic structure. Puck is still the shrewd and knavish sprite. He still revels in confusion. Lord, what fools these mortals be. But he is not evil. He's not demonic. He's not the nightmare creature described in Scott's witchcraft manual. His mischief is playful, not malicious. And crucially, he's the one who restores order at the end. And that is how the play can remain a comedy. Shakespeare takes the raw material of Tudor superstition, the fear of fairies, the terror of woods at night, the belief that midsummer was a time of boundary between the worlds thinned, and he tames it just enough to let the audience enjoy the ride. But the danger is still there. Elizabethan audiences felt it. They knew that the forest at night was not a place of romance, but a place of risk. They knew that St. John's Eve, the night Shakespeare chooses, was a night of witchcraft and supernatural activity. They knew that fairies were not benign. They were capricious, powerful, and deeply tied to the natural world. So when the lovers run into the woods, the audiences feel the tension. When Titania is enchanted, they feel the danger. When Puck mistakes one Athenian for another, they understand how easily human lives could be upended by forces beyond their control. And when Puck ends the play by telling the audience that everything they have seen is no more yielding but a dream, it lands with a double meaning. Yes, it's a gentle reassurance, but it's also a reminder that dreams in Tudor belief were porous places where spirits, fairies and the supernatural could intrude. Shakespeare isn't dismissing the magic, he's acknowledging it. He's saying this is Midsummer. This is a night where anything can happen. And you, the audience, have just walked through it with us. One of the central conflicts in Midsummer Night's Dream is the custody battle between Oberon and Titania over who's known as the little Indian boy. And to a modern audience, it looks like a simple argument. But to the Elizabethan audience, it referenced something far darker. The belief in changelings was widespread. People genuinely feared that fairies stole beautiful human children and replaced them with sickly, deformed or elderly fairy substitutes. It was a superstition used to explain tragic medical conditions. If a healthy baby suddenly became ill or failed to grow, parents might believe the real child had been taken. Puck even said, "She never had so sweet a changeling," and jealous Oberon would have the child knight of his train to trace the forest wild. Shakespeare subverts the trope. Usually the changeling is an ugly thing left behind. Here, the boy is the prize. And for Elizabethan audience, fairies were not decorative. They were elemental spirits, tied to the health and the fertility of the land. They weren't imagined as tiny humans with wings. They were powerful ancient beings, capable of wielding nature itself. If the fairy king and the queen were in conflict, the land would suffer. And that fear was not just theoretical. The 1590s were marked by the Little Ice Age. Disastrous summers, endless rain, failed harvests, rising grain prices, and real hunger. So when Titania speaks in Act 2, Elizabethan audiences would have recognised their own recent catastrophes. In her words, Shakespeare uses the pathetic fallacy of nature reflecting emotion to explain the weather. She says, "Therefore the winds piping to us in vain, as in revenge have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs." And then she talks about agricultural devastation. "The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain. The ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted ere its youth attained a beard." This isn't just scene setting, it's an indictment. The fairy quarrel has caused a national disaster. And for an audience living through real crop failure, this was not abstract, it was painfully relevant. And then Shakespeare does something revolutionary. Elizabethan fairies were usually human-sized, frightening, powerful, capable of stealing children and blighting crops. Shakespeare shrinks them. He miniaturises them. he confines their power within tiny borders. His fairies hide in acorn cups. They wear garments made of bat wings. They wage war with bumblebees. Titania's attendants feed Bottom with apricots, dewberries, figs and mulberries, tiny natural foods. By making them small, Shakespeare tames the terror. The aristocratic audience could now enjoy the fairy court. The miniature scale transforms them from pagan threats into aesthetic, poetic beings. Still dangerous, but safely contained within the imaginative world of play. So, in doing so, Shakespeare effectively invented the modern fairy, the flower fairy tradition, the delicate ornamental spirit of later folklore. And basically, what we think of as a fairy comes from Shakespeare. He moves fairies away from the terrifying hobgoblin tradition and towards something beautiful, lyrical, and theatrically manageable. So the cottony fairies that Elizabeth talked about right at the beginning, that is a reflection of Shakespeare and how he changes our perception of what the fairies are. Something we want to spend time with rather than something that repels us, something we want to avoid, something we need to appease. And he could do all this because he set the play on Midsummer's Eve, on the night where the veil between the worlds was believed to be at its thinnest. So for centuries, people lit bonfires to protect themselves from spirits and witches who roamed freely when the sun began its southward turn. The bigger the fire, the further the spirits stayed away. So Shakespeare takes that entire cultural landscape, fear, magic, weather, ritual, belief, and turns it into the engine of comedy. And that, of course, is A Midsummer Night's Dream. But he could only do that because he was drawing on traditions that were already ancient, already deeply rooted in the midsummer imagination. The beliefs he dramatized on stage were the same ones that people were practicing outside the theatre, around fires, in fields, in churchyards, in the dark hours of St. John's Eve. They're pretty flowers. So if you've not seen it, Midsummer Night's Dream, I would definitely recommend it. Titania, Oberon, Puck, Bottom, a play within a play. It is a delight. But you understand it in different ways now. You know that. So Shakespeare was kind of drawing on a lot of old writings. There's a 13th century monk of Winchcombe in Gloucestershire who compiled a book of sermons for feast days. And he recorded that on St. John's Eve, fires were lit to drive away dragons, creatures believed to roam abroad on St. John's Eve. And that these dragons were not merely stretching their legs, they were out there poisoning. This sense of you're in danger, draw to the fire to be safer, and we will cast together these charms and spells to try and drive away these evil spirits and evil forces. And this is from within the church. This isn't, kind of outside it. This is a monk writing this. In some countries, people dance barefoot around the fires or leap through the flames. A successful jump on Midsummer's Eve was thought to guarantee prosperity, to ward off bad luck. In Spain, people leap 3 times while crying Megasphora, which means witches off. It's a lovely picture I've got here somewhere, I think. I can see. Of, I guess it's probably a young man jumping through the fire in Spain. So yeah, just a British history. This is European, Northern European history. But also, the Native Americans, have beliefs, about spirits and solstice. The more you dig into it, the more you can kind of see that. Once you start kind of getting into it, it's fascinating. But it's all rooted in this kind of same belief system that there's something different about this one night of the year of St. John's Eve, where this veil is thinner and we're exposed to all these threats from the supernatural. So Midsummer has long been considered one of the most magically charged nights of the year, a time when rituals could heal, protect and reveal the future. In Bulgaria, anyone who stays awake to see the sunrise is said to enjoy good health for the year ahead. In Sweden, an unmarried woman who gathered 7 or 9 different flowers and placed them under a pillow will dream of her future husband. And herbs picked at midsummer were believed to be at the height of their potency. Water from springs was thought to have curative powers. Another old belief held was that any rose picked on Midsummer Night's Eve or Midsummer's Day would stay fresh until Christmas. And at midnight, if young women scattered rose petals, rose leaves as they were called, while reciting an ancient charm, their true love would visit them the very next day. Another practice advised singletons to pick St John's wort on Midsummer Eve. If it was still fresh in the morning, marriage was said to be on the horizon. St John's wort itself was one of the most popular plants of the season. Its little red flecks thought to symbolise the blood of the saint, and it was worn in wreaths. And then there were fern spores gathered at midnight on Midsummer Eve, supposedly capable of granting invisibility. Not metaphorical invisibility, but a literal cloak of invisibility, vanishing. You had to catch the spores at the exact moment they were released in the dark, and if you succeeded, you might never be seen again. Which could be a blessing, I suppose, to be on your social calendar. But beyond the fire and the magic, Midsummer was deeply connected to the natural world. Homes were decorated with flowers and greenery, especially circular garlands, symbolising the endless cycle of the seasons. Yellow, orange and red flowers, the colours of the sun, were especially favoured. Birch branches, fennel, trefoil, white lilies were commonly used. John Stowe, the London writer I talked about earlier, the chronicler, tells that every door was shadowed with green birch, long fennel, St John's wort, white lilies and such like. Many herbs carried spiritual meaning. Trefoil with its 3-part leaves symbolised the Trinity. Madonna lilies were associated with the Virgin Mary. Cattle were crowned with wreaths of St John's wort. And animal pens were decorated for protection. Herbs picked at midsummer were believed to be more powerful for medicine and for magic, making this the prime time for remedies and charms, and the occasional love potion. So if you could head to a churchyard near midnight on Midsummer Night's Eve, at the stroke of 12, run around the church scattering rose leaves and rosemary while chanting, "Rose leaves, rose leaves, rose leaves I strew. He that will love me, come after me now." So whether now is meant literally is unclear, and being chased through a graveyard at midnight would certainly be memorable. Others preferred well-dressing. Midsummer may be a fire festival, but it also begins the mark of Cancer in the astrology charts, yeah? And that's a water sign. So visit a holy well just before sunrise, walk clockwise around it 3 times, offer silver coins. If you have a problem you want to release, write it on a slip of paper and drop it into the moving water on the solstice. Or take advantage of midsummer's fiery nature and burn it safely. You can even use the ashes. Once cold, add them to a pouch for protection, or scatter them in your garden to ensure a bountiful harvest. And if you're a card reader, tarot or oracle, you can leave your cards in the solstice sun to clean them. So this was the kind of power of midsummer. It meant bonfires in the streets, dragons and flames, mischievous spirits in the hedgerows, herbs gathered by moonlight. It was a time for healing, for magic, for reconciliation, and yes, admittedly some very, very good parties. And while most of us are not going to start rolling flaming cartwheels down the hills, or dying children look like demons, please don't do that, you can bring a little midsummer spirit into your day. But why should we? Why should we mark what is really a misunderstanding? A lingering mistake from thousands of years ago. The sun doesn't rise. The sun doesn't go down. The sun doesn't move. We do. Or at least the earth does. So why can't we embrace this reality and enjoy the ride? Well, because for all our science, for all our certainty, for all our diagrams, tilted axes and orbital mechanics, something in us still responds to the sun. It's as if that we were the ones doing the moving. We know that Earth turns, we know that Earth tilts, but knowledge lives in the mind, and meaning lives somewhere older. For thousands of years, human beings lived entirely by light. Sunrise meant safety, warmth, work, life, beaming again. Sunset meant vulnerability, firelight, stories, the long wait for morning. Our bodies, our hormones, our sleep, our emotions are still tuned to this ancient rhythm. We're creatures shaped by dawn and dusk, not by textbooks. And long before we had calendars or clocks, if the sun's first journey was the first story the world ever told us. Light returning, light fading, light reaching its height, light falling away. Every culture built its myths on that pattern. And because it was one certainty in a world of uncertainty. Winter's bit hard, but the winter sun rose and the winter sun set, and everyone brought midsummer that little bit closer. The solstice is the moment that story pauses, the breath between movements, the turning point where ascent becomes descent, where the year pivots, where the light stands still for a heartbeat before it begins its long slide back toward winter. And even now, with satellites and atomic clocks and perfect astronomical models, we still feel that pause. Not in the mind, but in the bones. Because the solstice isn't just an astronomical event, it's our inheritance. So go ahead, light a candle, go gather some flowers, make a toast to the longest day of the year. If there's somebody you mean to make peace with, maybe Midsummer's Day is the perfect day to do that. So there we go. I do hope that you've enjoyed your time and tales. I'm right at the top of the hour, I think, of the solstice. I've enjoyed being with you as ever, and really enjoyed kind of researching that one. I thought it was kind of fascinating to kind of dig into it, because it's something that we don't really talk about all that much. We all kind of know it's there and it happens, but I don't think many people really know kind of what solstice is, which got such a rich, deep heritage. But unless you're aware of it, it is incredibly fascinating to discover all about the magic of the witches and everything that kind of go with it, and the fairies and Shakespeare and everything. So I do hope there's been rich food for thought there. You've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again. So if you're around tomorrow, watch party we do Pateley Bridge, which was beset with one or two tech difficulties at the time, but I've edited those out so we can watch it in one seamless flow. Glad you enjoyed it, Leslie. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Trish, as well, for being here. And David, David, didn't you run? So my eyesight is terrible, terrible. Mine loved it. I thought it might be dipping its toe in some of your interesting areas of interest. And of course, you know, if you want to go sort of further then into the more modern sort of takes, there's a lot of Wicca, you know, and the kind of modern codification, you know, of pagan belief systems, you know, is absolutely 100% nailed down into this kind of belief system, into Belltown, first of May, the fires, the flowers, all, it's just kind of now being kind of reappropriated to within, you know, the contemporary pagan belief system. So it hasn't kind of gone anywhere. It sits, you know, quite happily with people that are quite happy to have a belief system, if you like, that's tied more into the planet rather than celestial beings or whatever we describe. Goddess. Anyway, let's not get into areas like that. But you know, as I say, it's still very much part of a belief system that's alive. So it hasn't gone anywhere. So there we go. A great film, Wicker Man. Watch the old one. Yeah, absolutely. New Wicker Man, pointless. Old Wicker Man, 1973, something like that. Is it? Edward Woodward, Britt Eklund. Absolutely brilliant. Love it. You should watch that. And yeah, so dive in. It's Midsummer. If you haven't seen the Swedish film Midsummer, watch it. It's a strange, eerie one. And I think you'll enjoy it. Otherwise, if you can get a copy somehow of... I have no idea what's on YouTube. I should look, shouldn't I? See if there is, you know, an old version of Midsummer Night's Dream to watch, because it is wonderful. It's such a great story. And as we say, which Shakespeare, you know, he just tells great stories. If you can get past the language is so poetic and lovely and so light, you won't be a problem. Not in the clunking way I delivered it there, but you really enjoy it. So go and look at Midsummer Night's Dream and put your tree just like dissolve into a wholly different world for 2.5 hours. It's magical. You'll love it. So anyway, from York, I don't know where we're going to be next week, but we'll be in York. We'll be out and about somewhere nice. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Otherwise, join us tomorrow evening for photographer, setting sitting of Pateley Bridge. Thank you ever so much, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.